After my father went into a coma at his retirement party, my stepmom forced me to work as her maid, saying, "You owe us for every day you've lived here for free." 2 days later, my dad sat up and said, "What do you mean she was cleaning your toilet?" I never thought life would twist like this. One minute I was helping my dad celebrate his retirement, standing beside him beneath fairy lights strung across the vineyard, hearing him toast the people he loved, his eyes watery and proud. And 2 days later, I was on my knees scrubbing grout in my stepmother's bathroom because she decided that me being under her roof now came with a price tag. It wasn't sudden, now that I think about it. The tension with Diane had always been there, hovering just beneath the surface like a spiderweb you don't see until it's clinging to your face. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being sensitive, or maybe misreading her tone. But after Dad went into that coma, she didn't even pretend anymore. It was like he had barely slipped under the hospital blankets before she flipped the switch. Her first real words to me after the hospital visit weren't concerned. They weren't comforting. They were, "We need to talk about you pulling your weight around here." I just blinked at her. I hadn't slept in almost 40 hours. I'd been by Dad's side, fielding phone calls from family and the firehouse, updating people and holding his hand when the nurses would let me. And she was sitting at the counter like a CEO with a clipboard. "You've been here nearly a year," she said, folding her manicured hands like we were in some kind of interview. "Harold may have let that slide, but that's not how I run this household." I just looked at her. My mouth might have opened. "I don't remember." She kept going. "So unless you're planning on getting your own place by the end of the week, I expect you to start contributing." I thought maybe she meant cooking or errands or something. But then she reached into a drawer and handed me an actual checklist. It was typed. "Clean both bathrooms top to bottom, use scrub brush behind toilet, vacuum entire upstairs plus baseboards, mop tile floors, use vinegar mixture under sink, polish cabinet handles." She had polish? "Wipe down patio furniture every day?" I asked, my voice cracking from sleep deprivation and disbelief. "Don't get dramatic, Nora," she said with a tight smile. "You owe us for every day you've lived here for free." Us? As if Dad would have ever said that. As if I hadn't helped care for him during his flu last winter, or cooked them dinner for months while I was job hunting, or picked up their dry cleaning when Diane forgot. I wanted to tell her to go to heck. But I didn't have a job or savings. Rent in Santa Rosa was absurd. I had no friends I could crash with, and the weight of my dad's condition pressed down like a block of ice. I couldn't just leave him behind. I couldn't let her be the only voice he heard when he woke up. So I stayed. The next morning, I found the list on the counter again. No greeting. No note. Just the checklist, with little boxes beside each task. So I cleaned. It was humiliating. Scrubbing Diane's bathroom, the one she kept spotless herself before, felt intentional. Like she was making a point. Like she wanted to watch me break down, one toilet at a time. She wouldn't look at me when I worked, but she'd walk by and hum. Sometimes she'd come into the room after I finished and redo a corner, just to make a passive-aggressive point. Once, I caught her taking a photo of the kitchen sink I'd just scrubbed. "Proof of your contribution," she said when I asked her what she was doing. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I started sleeping less, worrying more. I applied to more jobs, desperately trying to claw my way out, but nothing was sticking. And every day, I woke up in the same childhood bed, saw the same chore list, and felt like I was drowning in shame. Then came the day everything changed. It was barely 2 days into this twisted arrangement. I was crouched in her bathroom, trying to remove hard water stains from her pristine shower door. My back hurt, my knees ached, and my hands were raw from the cleaner. I was halfway through wiping the last glass panel when I heard it. A thump. Not loud, but sharp enough to make me stand up. Then, hurried footsteps overhead. A door slamming. Diane yelled something I couldn't make out. I bolted upstairs. When I reached the guest bedroom, Dad's temporary hospital room, my breath caught in my throat. My father was sitting up. Just sitting up. Blinking, confused, pale, and blinking like he'd just woken from a nap. Diane was in the corner, frozen. "Where's Nora?" Dad croaked. I stepped inside, almost afraid to speak. "I'm here," I said. He looked at Diane. What do you mean she was cleaning your toilet?" His voice was gravel, but his tone was unmistakably sharp, disbelieving. I felt my heart slam into my chest. I hadn't said anything. Not yet. Diane's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She was just helping keep the place up, she managed. "Helping?" Dad repeated. His eyes found mine. "What's going on?" And that's when it all came out. I didn't plan to unload it, but the words poured out of me like floodwater. I told him about the lists, the schedule, the way she spoke to me, the things she said, and how she made it sound like he'd agreed to this. Diane tried to interrupt. He held up his hand. He didn't yell. He didn't move much, and he couldn't. But he turned his head to her slowly and said, "Leave. Go to your sisters." She sputtered. "Harold, you've just woken up, you don't know now." I'd never heard him say a single word with so much finality. And she left. She actually left. She took her purse and keys, slammed the front door like a teenager, and drove off. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like gravity had shifted. Dad looked at me again, his face pale, drawn, but clear. "You okay?" I didn't realize I was crying until he said it. He reached for my hand, and for the first time in days, I felt grounded. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if he'd fully recover, or if Diane would be back with claws out. But for the first time in weeks, I had something that felt like hope. The house felt different without Diane. Quieter, for one. But it wasn't peaceful. Not yet. It was more like the aftermath of a storm when everything is still standing but nothing is quite the same. Dad had only been awake a few hours, and already the emotional weight of what had happened was starting to show on his face. He asked me 100 questions in slow motion: what month it was, what the doctors said, how long he'd been under, if anything else had happened while he was out. I spared him the worst of it at first. I didn't tell him about the way Diane had snapped her fingers at me like I was a hotel maid. Or how she'd told her sister I was taking advantage of Harold's good heart on the phone when she thought I wasn't within earshot. I told him the basics. I told him about the chore lists, the way she started treating me the minute he fell unconscious. I told him that she was cold and angry, and acted like the house was hers alone. Dad just listened. He didn't say much. He looked hurt. Not shocked, just deeply, deeply hurt. Like he'd known on some level but had never allowed himself to admit it. It took 2 full days before he asked to speak with his lawyer. His voice was still weak, but his clarity had sharpened like a blade. And once he made that decision, everything after moved quickly. First, he removed Diane from all financial access. She had been joined on a few accounts for emergency access, as he'd once called it. But now? The only emergency he could see was how fast she'd tried to push me out and climb over him to grab the wheel of his life while he was vulnerable. Next, he asked me to help him look through the house for anything strange. And that's when we started finding the real story. In the filing cabinet in the home office, I found a manila envelope labeled Home Refinance. I opened it. Inside were papers dated 2 weeks after Dad was hospitalized. Diane had apparently started a conversation with a mortgage broker about pulling equity from the house, the one he'd owned before he ever met her. And in the upstairs hallway, hidden in the top drawer of the old console table, I found a small stack of printed emails between her and a realtor in the area. Assuming we can list soon. Husband is in long-term care. I'll need the full market estimate. She had been planning to sell the house out from under him. Just days into his coma. When I showed him the papers, he didn't get angry. He didn't yell or swear or rant. He just sat there in his bed, held the folder in his lap, and stared out the window for a long, long time. Then he said, she was never in love with me, was she? It was the first time he'd ever admitted it out loud. And I didn't have the heart to lie. I don't think she ever loved either of us, I said quietly. I think she loved what you gave her. And I think she resented that I existed. He nodded once. A few days later, he was strong enough to start moving around with the walker. We'd relocated his bed downstairs in the den so he wouldn't have to navigate the staircase yet. A nurse came by every day for a few hours, but mostly it was just the two of us. Like it used to be. We fell into a routine. I'd make breakfast, check on his meds, do some light chores not because I had to, but because it felt normal again. We'd sit in the backyard around noon, just talking about small things with our neighbors, the citrus trees that needed pruning, the way the sun hit the fence like it always used to when I was a teenager. I started sleeping again. Really sleeping. And slowly, the anxiety started to melt off my shoulders. That is, until Diane came back. It was a Saturday morning. The nurse had just left. I was chopping tomatoes for lunch when I heard the garage door open. I froze. My breath caught. Dad was sitting in the living room, reading a local paper. The door swung open like a bad scene from a soap opera. Diane walked in wearing big sunglasses, dragging a small overnight bag behind her. No warning. No call. Nora, she said, like she hadn't been gone in a week. Can you move your car? I need the spot in the driveway. I didn't answer her. I looked to my dad. He slowly lowered his newspaper. Diane, he said evenly. What are you doing here? She blinked. Harold, this is my home too. You can't just freeze me out. You walked out, he replied. You left without a word, and didn't check on me once. That's not fair, she said. I needed space. This whole thing has been traumatic. He stood up with effort, hands on his walker. He was wearing a soft gray cardigan over his pajama pants, and his expression was calm. But his voice cut through the room. Trauma doesn't give you the right to treat my daughter like a servant. Diane scoffed. She's freeloaded off us for nearly a year. I invited her to stay, he said sharply. I did. Not you. And she's done more for me in the last 6 months than you have in the last 6 years. She turned to me, eyes flashing. This is what you're doing. You've turned him against me. No, Dad said. You did that all by yourself. The silence was deafening. She stood there, stunned. Then she tried another tactic. Tears. Or at least, the suggestion of tears. Her voice wobbled just slightly, and she said, Harold, please. Let's not do this. You're not well. You're vulnerable. She's manipulating. He held up his hand again. I've already spoken to my lawyer, he said. You'll be hearing from him. In the meantime, pack whatever you need. But you're not staying here. Her face twisted anger, disbelief, wounded pride all colliding in a single expression. You're making a mistake, she hissed. You'll regret this. No, he said simply. I regret letting you into this family. Diane didn't leave gracefully. She stormed out like the house had personally insulted her. Dragged her overnight bag across the tile like she wanted to damage the grout, slammed the door so hard it rattled the hallway mirror, and peeled out of the driveway with enough force to wake the dead. Dad didn't say a word for a solid minute after she left. He just sat back in his recliner, breathing carefully, his fingers tracing the curve of the walker handle. I didn't push him. I just stood in the kitchen and watched the wind pick up through the open window. Finally, he said, I should have seen it years ago. I didn't respond right away. I knew that sentence wasn't meant for me. It was a confession to himself. But a few minutes later, he added, she always had a way of making me feel like I owed her something. Even when I didn't. That landed hard. Because it mirrored what she had been saying to me almost verbatim. You owe us for every day you've lived here for free. Dad must have been carrying that same guilt, wrapped in a prettier package. Maybe she'd never handed him a to-do list, but she'd been working with him just the same. Only her currency was guilt and performance, not vinegar and paper towels. That day, he asked me to help him draft an official statement for the lawyer. He wanted Diane out legally, financially, emotionally. Clean break. It wasn't simple. She wasn't legally powerless. They'd been married almost 15 years. She had claimed to some of the assets but not the house. That had been in Dad's name since before they met, and the refinancing attempts she'd tried while he was unconscious? That was enough to raise eyebrows. The lawyer assured us she'd get something. Spousal support, probably. But not the house. Not the accounts she tried to tap into. And not the retirement pension, which he had already moved to a protected account. Diane didn't take it well. She called. A lot. Left voicemails dripping with veiled threats and martyrdom. Claimed I was manipulating an elderly man during his weakest moment. She even went as far as to send flowers one day with a note that read, "I'm sorry you're confused, Harold. Let me back in so we can fix this together." He didn't respond. Just shook his head and pushed the bouquet aside. It became clear pretty quickly she thought he'd cave. That he'd miss her cooking, she rarely cooked, her companionship, they barely spoke last year, her presence, which mostly hovered like a perfume ad and left whenever things got hard. But he didn't. And slowly, the house started to feel like home again. We unpacked old boxes from the garage one weekend, filled with stuff from before she moved and photos of my mom, a set of worn books I hadn't seen since childhood, a faded flannel Dad used to wear every autumn. He was still weak, and needed a break every hour or so, but you could tell his energy was shifting. He was coming back to himself. And I was, too. Something funny happens when you live under someone's thumb long enough. You start to make yourself small. Quiet. Careful. But after Diane was gone, I noticed I was humming in the kitchen again. I wore pajama pants to make coffee without feeling judged. I stopped bracing for her footsteps every time I sat on the couch. I started living like a person again. And I started working, too. It wasn't my dream job, but I got a part-time role at a community outreach center in Petaluma, helping connect struggling families with local services. It was a foot back in the door. I'd spend mornings helping clients fill out housing forms, afternoons with Dad doing crossword puzzles or watching reruns of Frasier. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And it felt real in a way it hadn't in years. Dad, meanwhile, had a quiet fire in him I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Not angry, just determined. He got serious about physical therapy. He started researching support groups for people recovering from long-term comas. He even bought a second-hand laptop and started writing his own reflections, nothing public, just pages and pages of handwritten thoughts and timelines and memories he'd nearly lost. It was around that time we got the certified letter from Diane's lawyer. It was exactly what we expected, a formal claim to spousal support, a breakdown of assets she believed she was entitled to, and my personal favorite was a section where she tried to claim emotional distress because her husband's daughter waged a campaign of manipulation and alienation against her. Dad read it silently, then slid it across the table to me. At the end, in that same aggressive, performative handwriting I'd recognize anywhere, she'd written a note in the margin, "It didn't have to be like this. I was willing to forgive both of you." I didn't laugh. Not really. But something in me clicked into place at that moment. Not anger. Not sadness. Just clarity. She'd never believed she did anything wrong. Not once. Dad wrote his response with his lawyer the next day. It was firm, emotionless, and irrefutable. He agreed to modest support because it was the law, not because she deserved it, and made it clear any attempt to further interfere with his life or mine would result in legal consequences. The lawyer asked him if he wanted to attach any personal note or message. Dad smiled gently and said, "No. That's what she wants. A reaction. Let's not give her dignity." The silence after Diane received Dad's legal response was almost unsettling. No texts. No calls. No surprise visits. Weeks went by without a single shrill ring of the doorbell or unwanted email. We wondered if it was the lawyer's firm language that did it, or maybe she'd finally realized she couldn't talk or guilt her way back into the life she once controlled. But I knew her well enough to know, silence from Diane wasn't surrender. It was a setup. Dad and I had started settling into something that looked and felt like healing. His walking was getting stronger. His appetite was back. We were even going out for short drives to the coast, to the grocery store, to the park downtown where we used to feed the ducks when I was a kid. I was working more shifts at the outreach center. Even started helping coordinate a new pilot program connecting domestic violence survivors with local landlords willing to take housing vouchers. I hadn't realized how much I'd been suffocating, how deeply Diane's control had carved into me until it was gone. It wasn't just about chores or comments. It was the constant feeling of being unwelcome in my own father's house. Of being watched and measured. Of being less. Now, I don't feel any less anymore. I just felt me. Which made it all the more jarring when I came home one Wednesday afternoon to find the mailbox stuffed with 3 letters, all addressed to Dad, all from different banks. I handed them to him without thinking, pouring myself a glass of water from the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard him call from the living room. His voice was tense. "Nora, come here a second." He had one of the letters in his lap, unfolded, his brows furrowed hard. "It's from UC Bank. They're confirming the cancellation of my loan request." I sat beside him, heart starting to thump. "What loan request?" He handed me the paper. It had Diane's name on it as well. Apparently, she had tried again to use his coma as a window of opportunity. While he was under, she'd submitted multiple loan inquiries under his name and hers jointly, trying to pre-qualify for personal credit extensions. The paper trail was weak, and nothing had gone through officially, but there were inquiries. And even now, months later, those inquiries were surfacing in his credit report. We were stunned. It wasn't illegal yet, but it was a red flag. And it confirmed what we'd suspected for a while: Diane hadn't just been planning to take advantage if Dad died. She was already trying to cash out before it even looked like he would. The worst part? These inquiries had been made while I was scrubbing her bathroom tiles. While I was making her coffee and sorting her laundry. While I was quietly questioning my self-worth. I looked at Dad. "Do you want to report her?" He shook his head slowly. "We'd need more proof. And even if we had it, she'd just spin it. Say I authorized it. Say it was confusing. She's good at pretending to be confused." He was right. We made a note of everything. Photocopied the letters. Had them added to his legal file. It might not have led to charges, but it painted a pattern. And patterns, we knew, mattered in family court. A few days later, Diane made her last move. A handwritten letter, delivered in a glittery envelope like she was sending a birthday card. It wasn't addressed to Harold. It wasn't addressed to Dad. It wasn't even Mr. Kinsey. It was addressed to my husband. Inside was a 6-page note. Dramatic. Laced with flowery prose and self-pity. She called herself a misunderstood partner. Claimed that she only acted out of fear and desperation when he got sick. That she felt cast aside because I was always in the room. That she had tried to protect the household the only way she knew how. She even wrote, "Nora never respected our bond. She always saw me as an obstacle. Maybe that's why she poisoned our connection." I let out an actual laugh when I read that line. Dad didn't say much when he read it. Just folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and tossed it into the drawer of his nightstand. We never spoke of it again. And she never contacted him again, either. By fall, the divorce proceedings were quietly moving through the system. Diane had hired a new lawyer less flashy than her first, probably cheaper. Her demands were softer now, like she realized her leverage had slipped through her fingers. Dad gave her a modest monthly sum and kept the house. She kept her car, some jewelry, and a few pieces of furniture she insisted were family heirlooms, even though they were clearly from Pottery Barn. She got nothing more. No more keys. No more walk-in closet. No more control. Around Thanksgiving, I finally got my own apartment. It wasn't big, just a one-bedroom near downtown, but it was mine. I decorated it in soft colors, kept fresh flowers on the table, and strung twinkle lights around the balcony. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed having a space that reflected me. Dad helped me move in. He insisted on carrying the lighter boxes, even though the nurse warned him not to overdo it. He sat on my new, second-hand, sofa, holding a glass of lemonade, looking around like he was trying to memorize the space. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. I sat beside him, shoulder against his. "I'm proud of you too." We didn't need to say anything else. That was our way. By the time the final divorce papers were signed, spring had settled into Sonoma County. The jacarandas were blooming along the sidewalk outside my apartment, and my morning walks had become a ritual, coffee in hand, earbuds in, letting the cool air bite just enough to remind me I was alive and whole again. Diane's presence faded like a bad smell after you finally crack a window. At first it lingered, memories of her voice echoing in the back of my head, the way she used to clip her words when she spoke to me like I was a burden. But then, little by little, it left. Some days, I'd go a full 24 hours without thinking of her at all. That felt like progress. Dad kept busy. His mobility improved to the point where he could drive short distances again. He even started volunteering twice a week at the local community firehouse, doing light clerical work. I think it gave him a sense of purpose. After decades of solving arsons and inspecting disaster sites, sitting still too long didn't suit him. We had dinner together every Sunday. No matter how busy the week got, I'd drive over to his old house now, truly, and finally his, and we'd eat something simple. Grilled salmon. Steamed vegetables. Pot roast if he was feeling nostalgic. Sometimes we didn't even talk much. We'd just sit on the back patio as the sun dipped behind the trees, our plates balanced on our laps, and let the quiet be enough. One night, not long after everything was officially over, he brought out a small box after dinner. It was plain, no label, just a little velvet-lined thing about the size of a book. "I found this in the back of my closet," he said, setting it between us. "Thought you should have it." Inside were things I hadn't seen since I was a child: a charm bracelet I used to wear on the first day of school, a photo of me and Mom at a county fair when I was 6, a pressed flower from the first bouquet I ever gave him on Father's Day. There was also a folded-up note in my handwriting at age 10 where I'd written, "You're my favorite person ever. Please never marry anyone." I felt my chest tighten. "Guess I should have listened to that last part a little harder," he said with a sheepish smile. I looked at him, then back at the box. It wasn't just a time capsule. It was a reminder that he'd never forgotten who we were before everything else got in the way. "I'm glad you came back," he said quietly. "Not just to help me, but to remind me of who I was before all this." I nodded. "Me too." There was no dramatic music. No camera pans. Just the sound of crickets and the wind moving through the trees. But something in that moment shifted. Not in a loud, explosive way. In a soft, irreversible one. We were done surviving. We were finally living again. 2 months later, I got a promotion at work. They made me program coordinator for the new housing initiative with a steady salary, benefits, and a small team under me. I bought a nicer couch, planted herbs on my balcony, and started writing again just for me. Journaling, reflecting, remembering who I was before I had to armor up just to get through a day in that house. And then, one evening, I got a call. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. It was Diane's sister. Carla. She sounded awkward. Nervous. Like someone who had practiced this call 5 times before dialing. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I just wanted you to know. Diane's moved. She's in Arizona now." She won't be bothering you or Harold again. I think she finally realized she lost. There was no malice in her voice. Just resignation. Okay, I said after a long silence. Thank you for letting us know. Carla hesitated before hanging up. I'm sorry for what she put you through. We all saw pieces of it, but I guess no one really wanted to believe she could be that cruel. She hung up before I could say anything else. I sat on the couch in my apartment for a long time after that, staring at the window. Outside, the street light flickered. A car drove by. The world kept turning. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't angry. Or hurt. Or anxious. I was just free. Diane didn't get punished in some grand, cinematic way. There was no public humiliation, no takedown, no final screaming match. She just lost access. To our home. To our hearts. To the power she thought she'd always have. And me? I built something better in the space she tried to crush. A life of my own.